In this segment of our discussion on labor supply, let's talk about the decision to work, which really means we're going to be talking about the labor supply relationship. So let's consider this in terms of this constrained optimization model of budget and utility that we've developed, and we'll think about how this looks at different stages of one's career, how it looks based upon different wealth or endowments, and how it looks based upon different stabilizers that we might see in the marketplace. These are the stabilizers we discussed in an earlier segment, of course. So remember that we're talking about the labor-supply relationship. And as we talk about that, we're really simply discussing some labor units and some wage in our basic upward-sloping labor supply. So when we're talking about the decision to work, we know that the decision to work affects the labor supply. And really what we're talking about is the determinants of labor supply. So the decision to work is affected by the determinants of labor supply. And we might see an outward movement in our labor supply curve, or we might see if something demotivates people to work, we might see an inward movement in our labor supply curve. Recognize that I said outward and inward here. What I'm really talking about is at any given wage, I'll call it wage prime, that we see differences in the number of labor units supplied. So if we started at LS and moved outward, we started, let's say, at L and moved to some L prime. If we started at L or LS and moved inward, we went to, let's say, L minus. So we're seeing changes, positive and negative changes in the number of labor units. So as we say that we move outward, out into the right, that's a positive change. If we move inward, or it looks like we've shifted the labor supply curve up, what we've really done, though, is we have reduced the labor supply. We've said there's some negative change in the labor supply because of the effect of these various determinants. And talking about the three areas that we're going to here, stages of career, wealth and endowment, and stabilizer effects, we're really only talking about some of the possible determinants of labor supply. Obviously, one of them is also going to be the wage itself. But remember, in this labor supply relationship, with our basic labor market model structure here, as the wage changes, let's say from W and L to W prime to L prime, it really hasn't shifted our curve. It's just moved us from one point on the curve to another point. So we're moving along. So when we're thinking about these determinant effects that are not simply wage or labor levels, we're thinking about the determinants of labor supply as they shift labor supply to the left, to the right, which means as they increase, positive, decrease, negative. So let's start to look at this stages of career. We're going to consider where the indifference curve might land on this budget for a worker in the early stages of career, the middle stages of their career, and late stages of the career. Let's assume that we have some kind of a standard we're working from here. In this case, since we have a $20 wage that we're representing on this particular budget, going from 0 wage to $3.20, as we've gone from 0 to 16 hours of labor or 16 to 0 hours of leisure, saying that we've got 8 hours of both. So an early career individual might be an individual that A, needs income more than a late career individual. They've just come out of college perhaps, they have student loans to pay off, they're trying to develop a household, perhaps they've entered into a relationship or a marriage, or maybe there's even children, there's car payments, etc. And so the budget need is going to be greater. So maybe we see a budget need that's greater, in which case we see that the early stage, the U for the early stage, may look like this. Well, how does that differ from the utility curve, the placement of the utility curve with the mid-career worker? Well, the mid-career worker probably has had their expense structure settled down. They're used to the house payment. They're used to the car payment. Their lifestyle has adjusted. They're not having to accumulate all these goods that you would be accumulating as you're just creating households, creating a career. And perhaps we could argue that this individual would have a indifference curve that becomes tangent to our budget line, really right about the middle of our labor-leisure hours trade-off. So they're accepting the $160. They're kind of in the middle of their career, or maybe it's now more than $160 because as they're advanced in their career, their income has gone up. So maybe this isn't $160 now and $320. Maybe this is, let's call it $240 and $480 as wages increased from $20 to, say, $30 an hour perhaps. So they're able to move downwards on this budget curve to get the same level of happiness. What we're really ending up with is, in this case, more income, perhaps, and having to put in less labor to get there. So than when we were here in the earlier stage of the career. Well, how does this differ then from the late stage of the career? You probably can presume this very quickly. A late stage career person, maybe they have built up some resources, children are out of the home, the house is paid for, cars are paid for, student loans are paid off, they now have much of the retirement savings, so they have the luxury perhaps of being in this condition here where they can have yet less labor, more leisure, and maybe they don't need quite as much income. So we can see that depending upon the stage one has in their career, we may have then different placements of the indifference curve or different balance between the budget need and the utility need. Let's look at this a little bit differently. Let's think about what happens with the presence of wealth or endowments and how that might cause a change in this relationship. Let's assume for a moment that we're still here at 8 and 8 and 160, and that we have supposed some indifference curve that's coming off like this at U1. And now this individual is told that they've received a $50 a day endowment. And so just as we saw this earlier, we talked about endowments. We know that this individual now can receive $50 a day without working at all. So the budget really shifts outward by that same 50. And now they would no longer need to be at this U1. They can either move upwards to what we'll call U2 by working the same number of hours a day. So greater level of happiness, working the same hours a day. Or perhaps they end up at a different indifference curve with the same level of daily income, but now more hours of leisure, something along the lines of U3, which is not necessarily greater than U2 in the way that I've constructed it here, but it clearly is greater than U1. So we weren't trying to become greater than U2, we're just trying to become greater than U1 in either of these cases. So we see that an increase in endowment is going to cause us to have our indifference curve shift outward, at least in some respect, or if we have a decrease in endowment, you can suppose it would cause the indifference curve or this constrained optimization, this balance condition, to shift inwards perhaps. So this is a little bit different, and we have to think about these things because at different times in our lives we have different endowment levels. Sometimes in the early part of our lives the endowment is negative, so that's part of what motivates this early career curve being so much higher up here, which is saying that we are valuing the income we receive each day more than we value this change in leisure hours. Here, since we're being given some additional compensation, some additional resource rather, that creates income without us having to work for it, maybe it's an inheritance, maybe we won the lottery, maybe it's a trust fund, or maybe you received some stock from that company that you began to work with when you were young, and it was a startup company, and now 10 years later you've become a millionaire because the high-tech company entered an expansion and a boom, and now that endowment is yours not because it was given to you, because you earned it at an earlier period of time. Let's think about what this might look like with respect to some of the stabilizers that we discussed. So let's assume for a moment that we have a stabilizer in the marketplace that gives us, we'll use our same $50 here, that gives us a $50 benefit in our market or in our income relationship without having to work. And so a stabilizer at 50, and for every hour that we work, then the stabilizer declines for every hour. It declines by $5 for every hour. Well, what's that going to look like then? Well, we have to think about how this affects the budget, and we have to think about a relationship that affects the budget. So our budget now, in the presence of this stabilizer, starts to change such that the budget in this case is going to be equal to 50 plus some wage, we'll call that wage 20, minus the $5 for every hour that we are at labor. So this is an hour of labor. In which case, we can see that we're going to have this relationship where if we started with our basic 160 and 8, how would this affect us? Well, it's going to affect us by this line coming upwards. It's actually going to transect our budget above the 160 in this case because of this relationship. So let's assume for a moment that we want to know how many hours that we must work to receive our original budget of 160. We're going to apply this equation. So it's going to equal 50 plus 15 times some hours of labor. So I can fairly quickly begin to consider this. I know that to get the 160, because that's what I've targeted here, it's going to be then 110 equals 15 hours of labor, or 110 divided by 15 is going to equal my hours of labor, and 110 divided by 15 is going to equal 7.33. So in this case, if I simply want my same budget, I can work 7.33 hours, or that it would be 8.66 hours or 8.67 hours of leisure. Well, similarly, what if I wanted to work the same 8 hours? I would use this same equation then. So now I'm going to solve for the budget. And it's going to equal my $50 endowment plus whatever my change effect is based upon this stabilizer. So I'll say, again, it's 15 times, now I know the number of hours of labor, it's 8. So 50, so I've got 15 times 8 plus 50 is going to put me at 170. So in this case, I could work the same number of hours on this stabilizer and receive $170 because this $50 benefit, and for every additional hour I worked above zero, it would reduce my hourly amount by 5, or it would take $5 of the 50 away is what it would be doing until the 50 is completely exhausted, and it's exhausted at this point. So this gives us a basic idea of how to think about the presence of a stabilizer in this decision to work relationship. And remember, we had this long list of stabilizers. We had unemployment compensation. We had military enlistment. We had disability and workman's compensation. We had higher education. And depending upon the effect of that, then we depict a particular stabilizer, then we might see that that our relationship here changed. What would this look like if this was basic unemployment? Let me try to get rid of some of this here for us and just think about the effect of unemployment for a moment. Unemployment insurance, that is. Let's assume for a moment that we had some unemployment insurance benefit that was at $100 a day. So we could receive $100 a day at 0 hours of labor, 16 hours of leisure, but most unemployment insurance benefits are such that if you work at all, the benefit goes to 0. Well, in this case, our budget line would look like this. It would be downward sloping from the 320 if we found a $20 job, even working a little bit, and then it just spikes upwards. So at 0 hours of labor, we received the $100 of benefit, but at any amount of leisure, or rather any amount of labor above 0, or any amount of leisure below 16, that benefit goes away completely, and now we're subject to that wage rate. So this is simply a discussion of some of the determinants of leisure, or rather some of the determinants of labor supply.